Oppo is one of those smartphone manufacturers that puts out ultra quality smartphones but seems to be largely overlooked in the West, and that said, I think the Find X3 Pro has aged incredibly well. Its sleek design, fast internal hardware and everything else, well, that makes for a very good package, and especially at an intriguing price point of £350 to £400 second hand. It might be one of the best deals on the used market, so today let's talk about that. Thanks to Damien Wild for providing our review unit today. This is my 18-month later look at the Oppo Find X3 Pro. Hey guys, I'm Ryan Thomas and I'll explain this pink fluffy jumper quickly. This, if you can see that, is the temperature in my room at the moment, and you've got me messed up if you think I'm going to be sitting here talking for 10 minutes without the fluffy jumper on. Anyway, the elephant in the room aside from the jumper is the fact that I've covered this phone twice already, once on this channel and once on Android Authority. I covered it when it first came out, about a year later, and now I'm covering it because the price has dropped so much. I mean, if you're lucky you can get one with a few scratches on for around £300, but £350 to £400 will get you a good one in decent condition. And it has a lot of stuff packed into it at this price point, and it doesn't seem to put a foot wrong. It's really not that old at all. I mean, Oppo released it in March of 2021, so yeah, I mean, it's pretty stacked spec-wise as well if you're really into those. So you get the Snapdragon 888, 8 to 16 gigs of memory, 256 or 512 gigs of storage, a 6.7-inch Quad HD 120Hz AMOLED screen, a beefy quad rear camera setup including a microscope camera of all things, which we'll get onto a bit later, and 65-watt wired and 30-watt wireless charging for its internal 4500 mAh battery. This may be one of the best spec to design to, price ratios of anything on the used market at the moment. Sure, there are phones out there competing with this with similar specs, but they may not compete with this in terms of the design, the beauty of it, and also the interesting feature, the fact that it has a microscope camera, and we'll talk about that when we get to the camera section. But I wanted to take a minute to just, bask in the glory of how this thing looks. Now, it is very slippery, as I've mentioned before, and I actually used the included case quite a bit with this phone. It's a silicone rubber kind of deal, but it's a little bit more firm than the stuff you buy on Amazon. It also kind of fits the phone really well and mirrors the internal sort of design on the exterior, which is really nice. It also keeps it feeling fairly thin, which is great as well. And you won't have to worry all that much about this thing looking, cheap or nasty. It's really nicely made. It's got tapers on the back, the camera bump is sort of merged into the design, really nice curved edges which aren't too over the top, they don't feel in the way. The only time I would say that maybe they feel a bit excessive is when you're trying to reach across the screen using your phone one-handed, and in that case it can feel a little bit slippery, but I think it looks and feels really well made, especially when you consider the crisp haptics, the good in-display fingerprint scanner, the decent speakers, the wireless charging, the Wi-Fi 6 and the IP68 water and dust resistance. Sure, I wouldn't risk dropping it at all, let alone in a body of water, but that IP rating does give you the peace of mind that if the heavens do open up mid-commute, you should be able to use your phone outside just fine. I feel the same way about the screen now as I did when it first came out, which is to say that it's a really nice unit. It's a bit big for me maybe, and for some people it's 6.7 inches, but the quality shines through. It has sharpness, clarity, colour, smoothness, and gets bright when you need it to and dim when you don't. It's a really well done OLED. It's been a dream to use and it's implemented really well, even if I do think that punch hole should be moved over into the centre. That's kind of my preference on it, but you might think differently and like having it stuffed over in the corner. Annoying is the word I was going to use when discussing the software on this phone, because I like ColorOS, don't get me wrong, and I think it's well implemented here, which is ColorOS 12.1. The thing I was going to be annoyed about is the fact that it wasn't on Android 13 yet, and Oppo has actually recently started rolling out Android 13 updates to the Find X3 Pro. It's going to vary depending on your region when you get it, and as a result of that, I'm not able to put 13 on it without sort of side loading stuff, so I'm only able to review this thing on Android 12. It's performed really well. It hasn't crashed or bugged out or anything like that. And I used it between 4 and 6 days, I think. If you include testing, it's probably 6 days. And I found that it was rock solid, looked decent, you know, performed well, has lots of functions. It was good, but the pre-installed apps, I thought we were over the whole bloatware generation thing. There's so much bloatware on this thing. Granted, you can remove some of it, so it's not the end of the world, but I'll put an image up where I can of just how much stuff was pre-installed on this thing and was installing whilst I was booting up the phone for the first time. It's just nuts. Shame on you, Oppo. Do better next time. Thankfully, the Find X3 Pro's impressive performance makes up for this, with the intensive 3D titles like Genshin Impact and Real Racing 3 posing no challenges for the 888 and 12 gigs of RAM in this review model. I found the speed both in and out of games to be more than acceptable, and I guess I shouldn't be too surprised when you take into account the fact that the Find X3 Pro is only 18 months old. It really isn't an ancient phone and performs accordingly. My thoughts on the battery life haven't changed. It's still a decent battery, and it's new enough that you shouldn't run into many degradation issues unless you bought a really used one. But my worry is that if you do buy one that's been supercharged a lot, I mean it has 65-watt charging, you're going to run into issues. Fast charging, you know, you can put it whichever way you want. Fast charging degrades your battery faster than non-fast charging. So 20-watt charging is decent, 65-watt is probably going to put more damage on the cells. Now this is something you could mitigate if you owned the phone from new, but it's something that you can't guarantee if you buy it used. And because the battery life was pretty decent but not amazing to start with, your mileage is going to vary depending on which model you pick up. I was able to get a full day of usage out of this thing, ending the day with about 35%, which might sound quite good, but I'm not particularly heavy on the smartphone. A bigger worry of mine is the standby time isn't very good, especially compared to the Google Pixel. I still have Ben's Nexus Pixel 6 here, which I've been using because I really don't want to give it back yet, and he hasn't asked for it back yet. But that thing can last a week or more on standby, whereas this I've found if I didn't charge it overnight or charge it, you know, it could really drop down by like 15-20% overnight, which is insane and is not something that I'm confident is going to last a long time. So standby time is a worry. Maybe that's fixed in Android 13 because it's almost definitely able to be fixed in software, but it's just not something that I've seen yet, and obviously I can't put 13 on it yet, so be wary of that. Let's talk about the cameras. The spec sheet is again stacked. 50 megapixel main, 50 megapixel ultra wide, 13 megapixel telephoto 2 times, and 3 megapixel microscope with a 32 megapixel selfie camera. They're as good in reality as they are realistically on paper, if a bit better. The 3 megapixel microscope is a bit of a gimmick, but is cool for capturing obscure and abstract images. Not all that useful, but cool nonetheless. I gave Oppo stick for not including the periscope camera system on the X3 Pro, and whilst I reckon it really should be here, the 2x telephoto isn't that bad. It gives you the sort of 50mm look, which I think makes smartphone images look a bit more than what they actually are. Oppo's colour profile is one of my favourites, I've said it before, I'll say it again, and that of course is exemplified by the main and ultra-wide cameras, which are just great. These are a big step up in quality from the other 2 cameras, with the ability to capture more light, more detail, more dynamic range, and I do think that they reproduce colour a bit better than the other cameras. I won't go on about Oppo's colours, but they're not afraid to add a bit of contrast back in, and capturing accurate white balance is one of the stack's strong suits. In fact, across the board in the plethora of modes, whether we're talking portrait, video, selfies, the lot, the Find X3 Pro really performs and doesn't make a song and dance about it. These phones aren't necessarily well known in the West in general, let alone lusted after for their stellar cameras, but the X3 Pro shines and shows its class, especially with these nice autumn colours as well. Which brings us back to should you buy it? And if you've been listening for the past 10 minutes, you probably know what I'm going to say. I am a big proponent for buying used anything. I've actually recently bought some stuff that is used. This camera is used, that microphone is used, monitor, just everything I tend to buy is used, apart from say storage and memory for computers, and earphones of course. It's just a good way to save money and a good way to keep stuff out of landfill, and this is one of the best deals in used tech right now. Is it as good as the OnePlus 9? I would say better, but it also costs more, so it kind of makes sense. It doesn't have the nicest software compared to the OnePlus 9. I feel like the OnePlus 9 gets the basics a bit better and obviously is cheaper as well, but this has the better cameras, the better design, the better screen, and I think it just sort of screams quality in a way that the OnePlus 9 doesn't. That isn't to say you shouldn't go and buy the OnePlus 9. These two are at slightly different segments of the market, but if you're after more quality, I would say buy the X3 Pro. Huge thanks to Damien Wild for sending out this smartphone. It's the last one of the box. I actually have to send the box back very soon. It's been great to get enjoyed sort of using the different phones, reviewing them, and have some content on the channel. He's probably held up this channel this year single-handedly, and yeah, I can't thank him enough for that. Links will be in the video description, as well as where you can find my podcast. I have a new one coming out, I believe, soon. Yeah, constantly uploading every 2 weeks. There's a new one. Have a couple of really interesting guests coming up in the next few weeks. So do subscribe so that you can check that out, and subscribe to this YouTube channel, of course, because that's why you're here anyway. And a big shout out to my Patreon for being continually supportive. Thank you so much. I'm Ryan Thomas, and I'll catch you later. Peace.